Today we are diving into something that hits close to home for so many of us, especially those who like to keep it all together: perfectionism. Now, listeners, what if the very thing that made you successful is also silently draining you? And in this episode, we are exploring how self-compassion and mindfulness they aren't just soft skills or trendy buzzwords. They are actually the antidote to a deeper wound, the belief that we must constantly prove our worth. And listeners, my guest today is a recovering perfectionist who works with high achieving leaders, someone who's been through the cycle of pleasing, producing, and performing, only to discover that real freedom doesn't come from doing more, but from being more present. So, if you have ever found yourself stuck between the need to be excellent, perfect, but the exhaustion of never feeling enough, I'm very sure this episode is for all of you. So, listeners, please welcome my guest, Tara Cousineau. So, Tara, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really honored to have you here with us.
Oh, thanks, Sana. That was a very nice description, I have to say.
Oh, Eric, it's such a beautiful um, topic, and often there are many misconceptions revolving around. So I think we're going to definitely go deeper into this. We are going to also blend a bit of mindfulness into this. So with that, Tara, you say that perfectionism it comes from a genuine need to feel accepted. I mean, it's such a messy feeling within us, when we feel that we have not been performing according to someone's expectations, or we have said no to them. What would they think? What would they feel about us? I mean, it's not just a desire to be the best. So, can you unpack how this need morphs into self sabotage over time?
Yeah. Well, why don't I start with my own definition of perfectionism? So, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been working as a therapist for many years, in particular in a university town where there are many high achievers. And I was one myself. I probably still would consider myself a high achiever. But
Mhm.
perfectionism is really it's a paradox created by this basic need for belonging or a fear of rejection, whichever side of the coin you want to look at, paired with unrealistic expectations for achievement and approval that really sap your energy or your life force. It's very taxing to be a perfectionist. It requires a lot of energy and a lot of thinking and a lot of planning.
Definitely, definitely. It's interesting because society it tends to glorify perfectionism as a driver of success.
Yeah.
I have everything is perfect. I have a good job. I have a good house. I have a family, or I have my loved ones. Everything is fine. Um, but uh, it's like the tip of the iceberg, or sometimes it's not
Yes.
visible.
Well, I think you know how it manifests, or many people relate to perfectionism often is by their internal narratives. Like when you start to tune in to what you say to yourself,
Mhm.
often that narrative is very harsh. It's demanding or demeaning, and it might just be playing on autopilot, and you don't even really recognize it's there until it comes up in conversation and you have this aha moment like, oh gosh, I'm being really mean to myself, or somebody else points that out for you. I mean, perfectionists really it's not your fault that you're a perfectionist, put it that way. Say it's not your fault. There's a little bit of a heritability trait. You might have sort of inherited this character trait, if you will, through generations. But mostly it gets reinforced in society, in our culture, in this constant pressure to be the best, to always have better, to do more. It's really part of this, no pain, no gain mentality, and that is incredibly depleting over time. It might help initially because it serves as a protective function, but then it just really does sap your energy or your life force after a while.
Definitely, definitely. And Dr. Tara, you're also you have recently written a new book, which is the Perfectionist Dilemma. Learn the art of self compassion and become a happy achiever. I'm really curious to know, since you have such a diverse scientific background on this. Um, what was the journey like, with your own perfectionism? How did it influence the book? And what can readers or listeners take away from it?
Well, I feel like my story is a version of many other people's stories. And when I was in my early 30s and I had just finished getting my PhD, I was the first one to go to college and get a secondary degree.
Wow.
I was the kid that the only way I'm going to survive my life or this family life is to become a good student, right? That's not uncommon, this idea that education is the path to success. And it's
Mm,
protective, right? Because you can focus on school, you can focus on other things than maybe what might not be going right at home or
yeah.
amongst friends or whatever it might be. But for me, it really kind of came to a tipping point, and I think that's what happens with perfectionism. It actually your striving gets to a tipping point where it is no longer adaptive. And so
Mm,
my tipping point was my early 30s. I had just finished my PhD. I had 2 very small children, like 2 and 4 years old, and I was in the backyard at doing a barbecue. And all of a sudden, I started feeling this pain down the right side of my face and my arm, and I really thought I was having a stroke. Like, I didn't know what else to make of this symptom. It was sudden, and it just took me over, and I ended up looking at my husband saying, "Call the emergency department." And so I was driven off by an ambulance, and they couldn't find anything. They said everything was okay. Oh, it's just, don't be so stressed, which is like the worst thing that a patient wants to hear. It's like all in your head or just find ways to do stress management. And I was like, no, but there actually really is a physical symptom here. I'm not making this up. So it was this mystery symptom that just lasted, actually quite a while. And it wasn't until I actually had a dental appointment where the dentist said, "Oh, well, your jaw is so tight. It's probably tugging on this trigeminal nerve that is why you're feeling all the shooting pain in your face." And I was like,
mm,
"Oh my gosh, this is years of tension." So, it just had built up. And so that's what started me on this journey of mindfulness,
mhm,
self-compassion, self-care, slowing things down, that it had to be my body that told me because I would have kept going,
mm,
right? So I often say the body, the body is the scorecard here. And so if you don't pay attention to this constant doing, performing, pleasing, it's going to get you eventually. And that's usually what happens with people. There's something physical that's
mhm,
happening.
definitely. And uh, you know, when we hear of the words mindfulness, self-compassion, um, they sound beautiful. And but in this reality of the world, what does this actually look like, Dr. Tara, in the moment when that inner critique or the inner judge is like
Mhm.
screaming at you that you are not able to do anything, and right now are you thinking about really thinking about self-compassion, mindfulness, and they don't work.
Mhm. Well, perfectionists who have such high standards and they don't know when to stop, right? And they hear that inner judge or that inner bully. Hey, when they tune in, there's some chance that happens in life where they actually tune in, that is the moment of mindfulness, right? Is being aware. Mindfulness, I know it's being sold in so many different ways, but mindfulness is at its core awareness. It's being awake, it's noticing. And so part of the early work when I work with high achievers is really this This very gentle noticing what is that inner critic saying? How are you experiencing it in your body? Are there feelings associated with it? That is really the first step, and it sounds so basic and it doesn't sound exciting, and people then just dismiss it as like, well, that will never work. But really, it's about paying attention to where your attention is going. So for me, I give one other example. When my youngest daughter was about 9 years old, she
Mhm.
comes into my home office and she says, Mommy, is your job writing emails all day?
Valid question.
It was totally valid. It's 8 o'clock at night. Why am I sitting at my computer writing an email when I should be reading, a bedtime story or tucking a kid in? And and it was like that was that wake up moment where I was like, oh my gosh, enough. Enough already, right? That's what the perfectionists need to know is like when is enough. And it's usually when you're at 80% rather than 110%. So so to your question about, how does it really work? Well, it works when you practice it. And that's where people kind of fall off is that they'll try a 5-minute meditation app or they'll see they'll follow along on a YouTube and they're like, ah, my mind's too busy. I can't do this. It's not for me.
Yeah,
But that is actually the beginning of the practice is to notice that your mind is so busy and you're already trying to do it perfectly at the
that is
get-go, right?
yeah,
So yes, it feels so lightweight, but it actually is, it is soft power, if you will. And I'll let you ask another question because I do wanna get back to self-compassion too,
yeah,
because that's
yeah.
slightly different. Mhm.
Yeah, that is the one. That is the one.
Yeah. Well, with self-compassion, I think the simplest way to think of self-compassion, because it sounds very lofty, right? Oh, compassion is about suffering and I need to be a good person and be, a good person in the world and to myself. And yeah, forget that. If I don't crack my own whip, I'm not going to get things done. If I'm soft on myself, I won't have a job or I won't make money or I won't get that award or whatever it is. There's always something, the not enough syndrome, right? And self compassion is stopping for a moment and treating yourself like you would a friend who might be in a very similar circumstance or situation where a friend,
Mhm.
if you saw a friend running on empty, you would say, oh, listen, honey, I love you so much, and you are just burning the candle at both ends. What is going on? And just to really start to have this kind inquiry to yourself, which I needed to do twice. Once when I ended up in the emergency room, and the other when my 9-year-old daughter is asking me if my job is writing emails. Like we get these opportunities all the time to self-reflect. And being kind to oneself really is a practice.
Definitely. And I mean, as you mentioned about your daughter, I think the inner child within us also will definitely question.
Yes. Well, the inner critic is an inner child. And in fact, we don't have one, we have many. So in my book, The Perfectionist Dilemma, I talk about, some archetypes of inner critics, which include, as you've said, like the inner judge, an inner bully. There's an
Mhm.
inner nitpicker or, an inner joy thief, right? That won't allow you to have any kind of fun or play or relaxation. An inner detective, that we have all of these sort of voices coming at us at different times. And they are actually coping strategies. They're patterns that developed when we were children, and so I always say, well, perfectionism makes sense. It's a logical solution to a problem that you've had earlier in your life as a kid, as a teenager. You might not have felt in, you wanted to avoid punishment. You felt like you had to strive to, have the honor of your family. I mean, all sorts of things. And so so my version of self-compassion is really actually tending to that inner child or children or teenagers and befriending them and naming them and saying, here you are. Who's showing up today? Is it, my inner saboteur?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something very, very new. I wasn't aware of this. I was aware of inner child or the inner critique, but there are archetypes here, and definitely they are conditioned by the experiences we have had as a child. I think this is something really interesting.
Well, I don't know if it's new. I think people just have different terms or ways of looking at it. I mean, Carl Jung talked about archetypes. I think what we discover is that we have these running narratives or these movies playing in our mind, and they're associated often with coping skills. And I think that's what people forget. When you have that mean boss, well, that's a coping skill for that person. It's not a good one, but it's a coping skill. And it's really about self-preservation, right? Avoiding humiliation, whatever it could be. And so when you can start to turn, like, just with some curiosity, that's where the mindfulness comes in. Just really being curious without judging, like, oh, what part of me is showing up today? Oh, that's that judgy part. When did she show up in my life? Oh my gosh, I remember in the 7th grade. And then you can start associating, "Oh, no, I've had this judge for a long time," or sometimes people will say, "Oh, I've always been this way." And I say, "Well, give it some time. You'll probably come up with some associations or experiences from your past where being a perfectionist was really important, and it helped for a time."
Mm, yeah, that definitely makes sense, Tara. And when because we are speaking in the context of high achieving leaders, and whether it's in any type of role they're performing, burnout is something that has to be addressed upon. It is inevitable. So how does it help in revealing perfectionist patterns? And why do some people miss the signs until it's too late?
Yes, well, I think, like, burnout is a consequence, like, it's a symptom of, for many perfectionists, of their perfectionist habits, and the reason that it shows up in the body, like I mentioned with my story,
Mm,
is because
mm,
they haven't been paying attention to the signs or to what their kids are saying or their partner, right? They haven't Perfectionists just ignore that, it's such an interesting thing. Sometimes I say that, when I'm working with a perfectionist, that they've inoculated themselves against the positive. Like, they can't even see the progress. They don't
mm,
once they've hit some sort of milestone or an achievement, okay, they can wipe their hands of that one, and then they're on to the next. As opposed to actually staying in that moment of, "Oh my gosh, I got this done, small win," or "I achieved this. This is something to celebrate." Celebration doesn't last long enough to make an imprint in the mind, in the brain, in the memory banks, so then you're on to the next achievement. Um, that goes back to that tipping point, and I think, burnout is such a difficult thing because it could be related to a number of things. It could be perfectionism, it could be sort of a mismatch between a person and the job,
mhm,
right? That is often a part of burnout. It's just that there's a misalignment. But again, if you're aware, if you're mindful, um, if you have a sense of what's important to you and your core values and what's meaningful, you might be able to offset staying in a job, let's say, way past the time limit of having learned anything from it. And sometimes people do that because they have no choice, right? I mean, not everyone can go out and get a new job. But the burnout piece really comes from this exhaustion in your nervous system, an accumulation of cortisol in the body causing inflammation, fatigue, depersonalization. So burnout, you're already at the sort of far end of the continuum, and you really want to catch it much earlier.
mm. And do you think, Dr. Tara, that part of the reason w- we burn out, especially in high achievers, entrepreneurs, business owners, um, leaders, is it because we confuse our self-worth with how much we can endure? It's like just keep it bringing on, like bring it on, bring it on, bring it on.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, it could be part of it. Like, this is why I like to kind of, identify the variety of maybe inner critical voices or inner strivers that are there, because It might really just be in a context, like, context is so important, and so if you're in a leadership position in a company, a lot is at stake, not only your reputation, but productivity or the effectiveness of a team. There's just so many challenges and burdens, and so someone who is perfectionist oriented has really good intentions of wanting to strive for excellence. There is nothing wrong with wanting to strive for excellence. It's a noble value, but it's how you go about it and how you restore yourself, right? That's the part that's missing with burnout is that there's been no habit of restoration. Again, going back to mindfulness or mindful living is finding balance. And I think that when perfectionists don't catch themselves before they hit a tipping point, they're just way out of balance.
Mhm.
And that's usually when the healing will begin is once they've figured out that they haven't been there. But, I think with leaders, there is some research that shows, or in management, like the 85% or 80% rule is actually pretty helpful as you strive for the 80, 85%. So you give room for adaptation, flexibility, being able to pivot. And when you keep going for that ultimate outcome, it doesn't leave a whole lot of room to renegotiate things or step back and say, this is not working. Are there other ways to go about it? So, perfectionism can cause unnecessary strain and stress. And often, when it comes to seeking goals, once you kind of hit that tipping point, you might be more prone to making mistakes, right? The self sabotage piece.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Um, so let's talk about the way out, the solution, Dr. Tara. So
Yes.
how do we begin rewiring this perfectionist mindset? Especially when it's evidently rewarded by family, workplace culture,
Right.
his own self-image. Why would we let it all go?
There's perfectionism isn't just one thing. Let me just say that to your listeners. And there are even categories of perfectionism, and we might find ourselves in any one of those buckets. Like a self oriented perfectionist, I think I would fall in that bucket where you set the own bar for success for
Mhm.
yourself, right? You're just very self motivated. Or an other oriented perfectionist where you have the expectations and demands that other people do everything perfectly, right? That's not good for relationships, certainly, or the job. And then there's socially prescribed perfectionism, which is that comparison part, where you're constantly comparing yourself to how others are doing.
Yeah.
And that's very tricky. The social media has definitely, um, I think, influenced a rise in perfectionism. There's no causation here, but it's definitely a correlation. And so we just need to be more aware that the intentions are good, the outcomes we want are positive, but the way we go about it is not ultimately effective. So, the method that I offer, the way out in the book, and the subtitle is Learn the Art of Self Compassion and Become a Happy Achiever, is kind of following through a method or like 6 steps, which I'll just say briefly. I won't go into them. But one is follows this acronym EVOLVE, the word evolve, where the first E is embody the present moment. That's really the practice of mindfulness and self awareness.
Mhm.
And then V is validating your experience. I think many perfectionists actually don't even allow themselves to kind of recognize their thoughts, emotions, or sensations as normal responses to
Okay.
stress, or that they validate that they've had past experiences that might have been particularly challenging or difficult. So that becomes a very important piece. Then O is open your heart. This is when you begin to befriend those negative voices in your head and cultivate a befriending, if you will, which is an antidote to shame.
Mhm.
Um, and L is the practice of loving your inner critic, right? And that's where I try to flip the script. People want to get rid of the inner critic, they want to banish it from their mind, but that will just make it worse. the best thing to do is actually to turn towards that part of you, that part that you might identify. Like, I have a part that I call Teen Tara. She's the one that, I have to kind of like calm her down before I go visit my mother. And so we have to learn to love that part and say, yes, this is going to be challenging, but you can do it. I'm here for you. Like, you have this relationship with your inner critic and you befriend that inner critic, just like you needed that kind of befriending maybe when you were a teenager or a small child and you didn't get it. You didn't get that validation. And then the second V is make a vow, which is really about values, clarifying your values, committing to change, discover new possibilities that might not have been visible before. And the final one is E, another E, which is spark the energy of excellence. And this is where I really bring in some of the more, energy medicine tools or energy psychology, where you're really working on balancing your nervous system, right? You really want to be able to kind of find a place in your nervous system that feels, in the flow, if you will, and well balanced. And so the book has actually a lot of little mini skills around that. So I kind of bring it back to the body. We begin with the body, we end with the body.
Hmm. That's interesting. And Dr. Tara, if our listeners they would like to connect with you and explore more about this, what would be the best way?
Oh, well, they can look up my name because my website is my name, TaraCousineau.com. And you can also find my book on any sort of online bookseller, The Perfectionist Dilemma. There's also a website called perfectionistdilemma.com. And then I just started a new blog, a new Substack, and called The Peaceful Perfectionist, which is kind of my fun new project where I just want to continue the conversation on helping people trust and love themselves and not be so hard on themselves. So that's definitely, if you feel like you might be a perfectionist or get caught up with those, not good enough inner critics, you can definitely find ongoing content on my Substack. So, and I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn and those kinds of places too.
Wonderful. I'll make sure to have all the links and details in the show notes. And Laura Terra, this was such a wonderful conversation because very productive one because not only have shared the wisdom but your journey as well. And I think if perfectionism for our listeners, I'm saying, has been running the show, then maybe it's definitely the right time to hand the mic to self compassion. So, thank you so much, Dr. Tara, for shining light on this.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. I love talking about this topic. And I just want listeners to know that, you are worthy of love and belonging. There is a kinder path to success. And there are many ways to do that. So, yeah, it's a journey.
Yeah, definitely. So, listeners, here's the paradox we are left with. You can be wildly ambitious and deeply kind to yourself. You can care about excellence without sacrificing your self well being. So, until next time, this is your host, Sana, and this has been the Mindful Living. Keep showing up messy, brilliant, and enough as you are. Thank you.